How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion from monster to inmate. Media myths versus prison reality. Hey guys, so in corrections, we deal with the person behind the crime. The media, they're going to push out to the public the monstrous act. And they're going to paint the picture of this person being a monster because they want to sensationalize it. They want to get their views. But when they come to the prison setting, we manage the person who did the crime. And 9 times out of 10, they're not as impressive as the media makes them out to be. And I thought that would be a good dialogue for today to kind of show you some of the differences between what's portrayed out there and what we deal with behind the wall. Because in the end, we manage the person and they actually are the ones that are managing the inmate, but I'm managing the image. But with that said, in the wall, even though we're managing the person, we also still have to manage the image because sometimes the image can be utilized for leverage in so many different ways that we have to make sure that that image that's being portrayed, that want for attention that the inmate is getting, doesn't affect how we do our job. Now, I will say for the most part, people with those high-profile crimes, when they come into the prison setting, a lot of them get humbled real quick, because they realize that, hey, I may have been some big thing on the outside, but in here, there's even people here that have done a lot worse than I have. So it may be hard for me to paint the monster image because people are going to challenge that. And in this world, maybe everybody's a monster. So I just can't compete with that. So a lot of them may come in humbled. Not all of them, but a good amount of them may come in a bit humbled right away. I mean, it's just, I got the attention, but at this point, the more that there's attention on me, the more someone may want to challenge me and take out that monster so they could be the bigger monster or maybe in some other perspective, be the hero. But either way, sometimes the attention does put them at risk, and that's why we have to protect them. But the first thing I want to talk about, which kind of touches into that, is the image of power versus the reality of powerlessness. So media often portrays killers as dominant, controlling, or masterminds with almost larger-than-life influence. Prison itself, they lose nearly all control. So scheduled movements and privileges are dictated by officers. Their power is stripped, and they often become dependent on staff for their smallest needs. So granted, I find that there are many that once they exhaust the process, they start to realize that this is how their life's going to be. So they find control within the routine of what's happening in the prison setting, which makes a lot of sense, right? So if they got structure, they find comfort or control within that structure. And that usually becomes the expectations that maybe policy or laws expect us as staff to carry out. That's why like a lot of inmates that come into a prison setting, when they kind of get used to the way life should be, they want life to be that way. So if you miss a meal by a minute, or if you're not giving them what they're supposed to be getting, they are going to argue with that because that is their sense of control. Kohlberger's doing it right now with meals and how he's being treated, because again, they're trying to find control within those parameters. So in their mind, I'm going to keep writing it up until I get what's expected. And they don't care about conditions. They don't care like, hey, maybe we had a code this day and we couldn't get to you, or the food service didn't have this in supply, so we had to supplement. It doesn't matter. I'm supposed to get this, and I'm supposed to be in yard at this time. And again, we just have to justify why they weren't given these things in some cases, especially if it goes into litigation. But there are some that may try that routine, may try to gain some control over what's allowed. But eventually when they start to realize that this is going to be how life is going to be, you could see the arguments start to lessen. They start to put their focus elsewhere. And then eventually it's like, okay, maybe they're starting to accept it until something could spike it up again. In some cases, it's funny. You get an inmate that's quiet, and once, let's say, there's an anniversary and there's attention back on him again, they may say, hey, attention's back on me again, and start trying all these frivolous lawsuits. Lawrence Biderka was big on lawsuits. We had a discussion with Russ yesterday, and Russ talked about managing Lawrence Biderka and how he was just always exhausting the legal system, like challenging everything from soggy food to what he's supposed to get that he's not getting. And it became a hassle, Russ said, dealing with him. If you guys didn't get a chance to check out that episode, it's the one I did yesterday. It's pretty interesting. Now I'm going to focus on women on death row. I'm going to find someone who's worked with women. I know women tend to be a smaller environment. I think there's only about 2% of women on death row as opposed to, I guess, the other 98% that are men. I've read numbers that are 50 women and 2,400 men. I don't know how accurate those numbers are, but I have read those numbers. And I do read a lot that it's 2% of women on death row versus 98% of men. So the two questions I had here was, how does the shift from being painted as powerful to being powerless play out behind the walls? And have you seen inmates who once had total control in the public eyes suddenly become dependent like anyone else? I think I kind of answered that already. So hopefully the people that sent that question got the answer. But basically, I think some of them fall into the routine, fall into the structure, and then try to find their power and control within those parameters. I want to mention something else that may not be usually seen, but there are some inmates that when they were out there doing their crime, a lot of experts believe that they wanted to be caught because they couldn't control the monster that was inside them. So they may have committed crimes and done certain things that really gave the detectives some insight on who this person can be and where we can find them, whether it's DNA or maybe a quick little sign or whatever, a little letter, something that would challenge the detectives enough to basically say, hey, we're going to get this guy, and these are clues that he's given us. So it's like it's weird because maybe even some signatures could be that way too. But basically, they know they have an impulse, and they're battling through that impulse until finally they can't. And it's funny because I remember talking to somebody who basically compared that to trying to have some control of something that you don't want to be or that you have conflict with. And I don't want people to think I'm comparing any type of challenges that someone may face to being a monster, but I want to try to draw a picture that there are certain things that you may be going through that may force you to want to go a certain route, and you don't want to go that route, but you're being compelled to go that route. And then what happens is eventually the persistence of the pressure overwhelms your willpower, and then eventually you act out, and now you can't stop yourself. And then there's maybe something subconsciously in you that wants you to get caught. So again, there could be some people who have done some monstrous acts that are very easy to control in the prison setting because they actually want to be there. Because now the compulsion of doing something monstrous is no longer in them because they can't act it out because there's too many obstacles in their way to go ahead and commit to what that compulsion was. I mean, I'm actually thinking for some reason, and guys, way on a lesser scale, but if I could draw a picture, but again, on a lesser scale, if you got people that are battling with some form of addiction, and there are some measures where they tell people that you got to eliminate the house, eliminate all the things in the house that remind the person of that addiction. So if they're an alcoholic, let's not put alcohol in the house. Let's not do anything that would go ahead and excite the addiction. And then there's some that say, well, they got to work around it. You don't have to empty in a whole house of alcohol because there's some people that can manage it. So why do I got to suffer? Because they don't have the willpower. So I guess for people that may not have the willpower to control that impulse, because when they're driving out, maybe they see a target that's vulnerable and they just can't, get distracted from that. That's what they want. That's what they want to go at. Then unfortunately, the compulsion gets the best of them, and they wind up just carrying out that same pattern of behavior. So then when they go into a setting where that compulsion is harder to carry out, then they're able to justify somehow in their head a reason that they can't do it to the point where maybe the compulsion lessens. Again, it's how they justify it. It doesn't become an excuse because there could be, mind their world, they think a little bit differently, right? So if I got someone that's vulnerable and could be a potential victim, maybe the good in me may say, well, I'm not going to do nothing because they have a family and all this other stuff, and I don't want to hurt that person. But if the compulsion is greater than what would be seen is not, it's an excuse, then I start to justify why I should do it. Come on, no one's going to know you did it. You got to do for you. So again, it's a justification based on justification versus excuses. So I wind up pushing forward on the greater justification. But now I'm thinking when you're in a controlled setting, maybe it switches. Maybe the justifications now are I can't do it. If I do it, this is what's going to happen. There's too many obstacles, and they start to settle in without having control, without having to worry about the compulsion controlling who they are. Again, it's just a perspective. When you work in the prison setting myself, Russ, Gary York, who's been on the show, you start to see people in a different light, and it's really eye-opening. And again, it's in no way is it to forgive what they've done, but it's to learn a little bit about who they are so we can understand how to manage them a bit better, because I get that they're out of society, but we still have to manage them. And manage them is make an effort to see who they are so you can understand why they do what they do. And I think that corrections personnel, especially those in custody, know these monsters the best. I really do, because they work around them and they see them when the mask comes off. And trust me, when they're performing out there, which I always say nice is performative, it's a constant effort to hold that mask up. But when they're in prison, they can't keep on doing that. The mask will fall off sometimes, and that's who you see who that person really is. So the next thing we got, so that was image of power versus reality of powerlessness. Then the next thing I got was fearsome monster versus mundane inmate. So media labels like monsters, beast, or killer dominate headlines. Talked about that, fueling public fear. And then prison day-to-day, many are quiet, withdrawn, or even ordinary in their behavior. They blend into routines like count, chow, and wreck. So the two questions that we had here were, do you think staff get desensitized to the media's monster label once they face-to-face with the actual inmate? And have you ever been surprised at how normal someone notorious seemed inside? So we talked to Russ yesterday. Russ was shared a story of 3 inmates that he dealt with that were notorious. Lawrence Bittaker, Randy Kraft, I think that his first name was, and then Tukey Williams. And Russ said, coming in, of course, people may know who they are, but then they kind of just blend in. For Russ, there were so many inmates on death row that Russ really didn't know so much their daily routine. He just knew his daily interactions with them. And maybe it did stand out, maybe the first 1 or 2 because of who this person was. And you're kind of, introduced to him, and there's a little bit of fame connected to that. But eventually it does die out because you're dealing with the person on a routine basis. And eventually the fame lessens and the person that they are starts to come out. So again, it's a balance that starts to shift. So you got the fame weighing all the balance. And then eventually when they start coming in, they're starting the system, and day by day, their fame lessens, and then just who they are shows up. And you can see that, guys, because the media, they move on to their next story. We were following the Emmanuel Harrow case, and eventually you had the shooting, and everybody's going towards the shooting. And, you still got the poor boy Emmanuel that's missing, but they chase story, they chase headlines, and they report, because that's their job to report. But that does affect us in the prison setting, because when something gets a headline, we have to manage that. And then when something doesn't get a headline, we still have to manage that as well. But it's Russ made sure to let us know that they're just men or women in the long run, monstrous in what they've done, but in the scale of the prison setting, they're no different than the other people that are under their supervision. So I don't want to say that the first question here is, do you think staff get desensitized to the media's monster label once they're face-to-face with the actual inmate? I don't think they get sensitized by it at all. So they don't get desensitized. This is just another day for them when they come in and they get brought into their population, because, again, this is one person. Staff has hundreds of them. As I said before, probably some that have done a lot worse. So, maybe there could be a fascination of trying to see who this person is in real life, trying to size them up, because I know we do that. But it's not so much about the crime, but I'm curious to see how big this person is. I know that was for me when I worked in corrections, was one of the first things I would notice is the size of the individual. Russ even mentioned with Stanley Tukey Williams, he was so big. So I think we do get fascinated by the size, because if you ask somebody, hey, what's that person like? The first thing they may say is, well, he's a small guy, and then go into some characteristics. But or she's a smaller woman, maybe 4'11". They go into the size first. So I think that's the first thing that we look at, as if this person is going to be a threat or not. Now, granted, there's a lot greater threats than size, and all because you're big Doesn't mean you're going to be a threat. And all because you're small doesn't mean you're not going to be a threat. But with that said, the first thing we tend to look at, maybe it's survival mode, is, at least for me, I tend to look at the size. And usually when someone asks me, hey, what it was like dealing with this person, I've dealt with a few famous individuals. Well, they weren't as big as I thought. And then I go into characteristics that seem to be secondary. But again, that's because the media paints them to have this huge picture and you expect this person to be huge. And then you come in and they're like this. And again, I think the inmates, same thing we're doing. You know, they're all over the news. Inmates are watching it and they see this person come in and they're sitting there like, that's who he is? That little guy did all this? And then they start explaining, well, that's why you pick on kids, or that's why you pick on women. But try picking on someone my size. I mean, that could be a whole other reason why they become that target. And the second question was, have you ever been surprised at how normal someone notorious seemed inside? You know what? When I first got in the system, I believe so. But that was a mixture of a lot of things. I really didn't understand the dynamics of prisons or jail. So you have to learn why you're working the job. So I guess when I was at the very beginning of my career, I think something like that would be shocking to me, because maybe I would walk in thinking it's someone that is hard to control. And when you go in, you realize, wow, this person is a lot easier to manage than I thought. But I think at this point, I'm not as surprised by how normal they may look. I'm just really not. I will tell you one thing, though, and I said this with Russ, and I don't know if it's because you know what, in some cases you may know what they've done, but there are people that when you work in a prison or jail that you may talk to that you just feel there's nothing there, no empathy, no connection, just nothing deeper than what's in front of you. And again, I don't know if that's because we know in a prison or jail, they probably have done something, and maybe it's just something that you feel a little bit more often. But I have felt that with people on the outside as well. And I may have said it to my family, like, I'm just not connecting with this individual. I feel like they're just very performative and just nothing deep. So I do think that there's something there where you could look at somebody and just think like, wow, there's something not right, something not resonating, because I do feel that we feel connection. And sometimes it's just not there. And that's based on how you feel. So I would definitely, when you're interacting with people, if there's something that doesn't feel right, but maybe it's just surface and you just can't explain that feeling, you don't have to explain that feeling to justify what you feel you have to do. You know, sometimes we get caught in trying to justify something and trying to be not to be socially awkward, where at the end of the day, that could be the foolish mistake that we make. Sometimes I may not have enough time to rationalize what I feel, because I may start going into some excuses or justifications why I shouldn't feel, where I should just trust myself and act on it and say, hey, something doesn't feel right with this individual, and just start kind of managing, walking away from them or whatever I got to do to protect myself. So again, that was number 2. All right, let's get to number 3. There's 5 of these. So I have infamy versus isolation. So a lot of these actually kind of bleed into each other or work together. But we have infamy versus isolation. So media, they receive constant coverage and their name becomes instantly recognizable. And some of them love that. Some of them don't. I've seen a couple of reasons why some of them may not. So obviously for those that do love it, there's going to be something narcissistic about them. I mean, to believe that you want to become famous, you're willing to kill somebody or hurt somebody to reach that type of infamy. So obviously right off the bat, you know, there's got to be some high level of narcissism there where everybody below them is an object that they really could care 2 shits about. So some level of lack of empathy, 100%. But that's their reason for becoming famous or infamy. But then there are some that may truly, and guys, this may be hard for people to believe, but I do believe it does exist. There could be some people that truly are remorseful for what they've done. They just can't control it. And they may have levels of guilt. So they may not want to be connected to that. They may just want to just forget it. They know they can't separate themselves from their actions, but they just don't want to kind of have it on display anymore. I don't want to be famous for these reasons. I just want to be forgotten, left alone. I'm here where I need to be. I don't want to go out to the community. I don't want to be judged, but also I don't want to go out to the community because I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to hurt anybody else. I mean, But then there are some that may feel that, well, I don't want to be the center of attention right now because I may have been a monster out there, but I'm not a monster in here compared to everything else that's around me. And I don't want people trying to take that monster out to be the new number one monster. So there's a lot of reasons why they also may not want that attention. And I know the one of the reasons, as I said, with the remorse and guilt, I mean, could some of them feel that? This is going to be crazy. And again, I'm not minimizing what they've done. I think there's been some that actually feel it while they're doing it, and they just can't control it. Again, guys, that doesn't mean I agree with them, or that doesn't mean, hey, let's feel sorry for them. But remember, in corrections, we have to manage the individual. But yeah, I do believe there are some that are controlled by the compulsion, and when they get locked up, as I said before, they're good, they're comfortable, and they don't want to go out and hurt again. It's like something just taken off their shoulders, that it's they don't have to worry about acting out on these things. The questions we had here were, what's the emotional toll for inmates who go from being the center of national attention to being nearly invisible in a prison tier? And does notoriety carry weight with other inmates, or does isolation erase that? So we kind of touched on the weight with other inmates, but so media comes and goes, kind of moves with the wind, as you can see. At the end of the day, they're going for the views, they're going for the clicks, and that's what they're supposed to do. They're also providing information. I get it. But there are inmates that may love that, rely on that, and use it as leverage. So it's great to see when the media goes somewhere else, because then they lose out on that leverage to try to control their narrative, try to control how their stay is going to be, if that's the case. And I think a lot of people may also realize, like, the media is only following you for so long until there's another story, and then it's gone. So we weigh it out. That's why you get inmates that are in for some really crazy crimes, crimes that aren't seen in good light by the inmate population. We're going to weigh out the media attention by putting them in some isolated area, protective custody most likely, and then we kind of revisit once the media attention lessens. But at any point, media could spark it up again. They don't give us warning. 10-year anniversary. That's right. He committed this crime 10 years ago. Damn it. Then you're back out there asking the inmate if they need protective custody, trying to doing a whole other investigation to see if there's any concerns with the spark again with the media attention. Because believe it or not, as they do their time, when attention lessens, they may not be as notorious anymore. And there's other people that are coming in that are younger, that don't really know what this person's done. Then the media, hey, 10 years ago, he did this. Like, oh, that's my cellmate did that. I never knew that. So it's always good to reevaluate once in a while, just to make sure that media attention isn't affecting them in a way that could protect their safety, could violate their safety. Does notoriety carry weight with other? We talked about that. What's the other point here? What's the emotional toll for inmates who go from being the center of national attention to being nearly invisible in prison life? As I think we covered that before too. As I said, some may want it, and it's a deep fall for them, but it's quite humbling. And some don't want the attention to begin with, so they're okay with it. Actually, it's a big breather for them. They become less of a target, and if they do have some guilt or shame or remorse, they don't have to be reminded of it as much. And I guess, right, who feels sorry for them? I get it. I'm just giving you a perspective. All right, so symbol of evil versus human moments. All right, so let's see. So media headlines flatten them into one dimension, pure evil. All right, so this matters. So again, if you're in corrections, you'll realize that you're managing human beings, and they're a lot more than just that one picture that you're seeing. So the media is going to paint a flattened picture. There's a monster. This is what you got. But when you go to manage them in a prison or jail, you're managing the individual, and that comes with everything. Everything that makes up the flaws, the human emotion. It's just everything is compiled. I not that I'm saying you love inmates, but I remember there was a movie, First Night, and Lancelot wasn't a perfect knight, obviously, but King Arthur loved him, and it turns out Lancelot violates that trust by sleeping with Guinevere. And there's a line in there where basically Arthur says you can't love people in slices. And what he's trying to tell you in this case is that people are filled with so many different things, so many emotions, so many things that, it's never just flat. There's the monster or the predator, then there's the prey, I guess in corrections, you could say the extreme. Yeah, we're managing a predator who's now prey. So you got to understand that human dynamic. And I think the media, as I said, paints that flattened picture, but we in corrections have to manage the whole person. So prison staff sometimes see human moments, frustration, fear, attempts at humor or vulnerability that don't fit the media character. You would figure that I know they were talking about women. There's lesser numbers on women in death row, but I'm sure there's some facilities or some states that may not have that many inmates on death row. So when there's not that many inmates, there's a chance for more individualized connection, at least with staff and the inmate. And again, we're not talking about crossing any lines, but you do interact with the individual. And I think Green Mile painted a real good picture of this, that if you guys haven't seen it, you should, or if you haven't seen it in a while, definitely something worth revisiting, because you are going to have interactions with these individuals, and they may not be bad interactions. I mean, when someone asks me, hey, how's that inmate? I don't really say nice, even though some people may say that. I don't, because I think nice is performative, but I'll say, well, he's not a problem. Kind of makes the day go by a little quick because he doesn't resist, kind of does what he's supposed to do. So part of that is understanding their actions inside the prison, and then saying, well, this guy's more manageable than this guy who really maybe just a druggie who we got here, but he's an asshole. He's a pain. So if I had to spend a day with somebody, I don't want to spend the day with him. I'd rather spend the day with him or these sets of individuals. Again, if you're working at the female death row, they say that there's lesser females. But now it could be a non-problematic unit. Yeah, they've done these things, but the unit itself isn't a problem. So there may be some people that want to work in those areas. It's like, wow, you want to work with death row inmates because look at the stuff they've done. Yeah, but when I work there, they're not a problem. So it's not a bad day for me. So when people ask me, how is that individual? I kind of, in the context of, well, did they give me a bad day or did they not give me a bad day? I mean, that's pretty much what it is. And there are some inmates that can make the day go by pretty quick. And again, you're not blurring lines, but maybe they are a little bit funny. Yes, they've done what they've done, but we have to work with them daily, every day. And that doesn't mean we minimize what they've done or we hold them less accountable, but we have to get through our day and we have to manage these individuals. So, I've seen officers, you have an inmate and he's funny and the officer's like, man, he's a funny guy. Oh, what'd he do? Well, he killed and raped them. Oh, so do you really want to be joking with him? And it's like, it's my day. What am I supposed to do? Because eventually interactions are going to happen. You're working in a prison or a jail and you see these individuals every day. And some people go home and say, man, I can't believe I was laughing with a person who did these crimes. And again, we're not talking about crossing any line, just maybe a simple interaction that was funny, but we have to interact with them. And at the end of the day, when it's time for us to do what we got to do, they get held accountable. When it's time for us to hit that switch or put that needle in, it's going to get done. Now, someone has asked me, could that affect an officer? An inmate on death row who's done these crimes, and now you go ahead and you execute them. Will that have an effect on the officers? And I believe, because we're human, it could, because we have interactions that we're used to every day. Now the interaction no longer exists. So there's an adjustment in that daily routine. So I don't know if it's so much you miss the individual, but you miss the routine. You miss the interaction that sped through the day. And that doesn't make us bad people. We're managing interactions. This is what we have to do to get through the day. So again, it's not about missing the individual or, oh, he's a good guy. What he did was a mistake. No, we're not justifying what they've done, but he's a manageable inmate that made the day go by a little bit quicker. So when they get executed, I've seen it. And as I said, Green Mile paints the perfect picture of that. The inmate gets executed and they all have a feeling of it, but nothing means that feeling minimizes what they've done. It's just related to the interaction that no longer exists within that daily routine. So I hope that makes sense, because I don't want people, because there are going to be people that will be on the extreme that will paint that out. So I try to paint so many perspectives to try to give people an understanding of why that may happen. So how do you balance recognizing these human moments with remembering what they've done? Kind of touched on that. And do these glimpses of vulnerability ever make managing them more difficult? I'm going to say no to that. Because even though I mentioned we had all these interactions, we still must remain objective and do our job the way it's supposed to be done. That's why I emphasize the line. I mean, you're going to have small talk with inmates. I mean, as long as it's controlled, you're going to have small talk. I'm not a real big fan of small talk, but small talk could be just something as, hey, how's your day going? Hey, did you get a call from your family? How's that going? Because you got to know who they are. You got to interact with them, because if there's something going on, I have resources I have to communicate with to let them know, hey, he doesn't seem right. Well, how do you know? Well, yesterday we were chatting about this. Today he's not chatting, or usually he comes up to me, says, what's up? Today he's not, or she's not. So you got to know your inmates, and you have to engage. And I will tell staff that as well. You should know your inmates, because you are their you're our immediate connection to them. So if mental health or other professionals can't figure out what's going on with this person, they're going to go to the officer, the person that deals with them every day, and get their insight on them. And if they're not doing it, they're foolish. So again, it's just got to know where the line is. You gotta still set those standards. At the end of the day, you're not friends with them. At the end of the day, you have a job to do. And the moment that dialogue starts to cross into something more personal, then you got to push that line down, however aggressive. So I'm going to say no. I mean, I can interact with somebody and the next day put them in handcuffs and charge them, whatever I got to do, with no remorse, no guilt, because that's my job. It's my job. So, and the last step is, or last question, sorry, is public fascination versus staff normalization. Kind of touched on this, but society, for the media, society continues to sensationalize them in documentaries, books, and articles, which I think they're starting to get a glimpse that maybe they're doing it wrong. Because as I said, when they had the shooting in Minneapolis, they said, hey, the media is killing us here. You're glorifying what they've done, and other people are going to follow that. So now all of a sudden the media is like, well, I'm not going to use his name. And they're trying to understand that maybe they are a problem when it comes to this. And that also problem does affect us in managing them, by the way. Officers, for prison staff, officers normalize them. They're just another inmate to supervise, which we touched on, and subject to the same policies and consequences. So how does staff perspective shift over time when dealing with someone infamous? And do you think the public will be shocked to see how ordinary these killers look once the cell door shuts? So for the latter, yes, because the public only has that one perspective. So there's no gradual shift in day-to-day routine or interactions with them that would make them think, or slowly grow into the thought that they're really not that spectacular. So yes. And that's why if someone comes up and says like a dialogue like this, that they're really not that spectacular, that's a crazy shift for you to pick up on, right? Because there's no step that introduces it. It's just going to be, this is what you thought he was, and this is who he is. And sometimes people refuse to believe that because it's just a drop. But for staff, as I mentioned before, it's the routine, it's the day-to-day, it's what they're used to dealing with. So, I mean, sometimes I see staff get upset when, they're working with someone and then they get somebody new on the unit, not an inmate, another staff member, and they get so fascinated. And they're going, oh, do you have this guy? Do you have this guy? Do you have this guy? And they're like, stop. Because inmates are watching you right now, and they're going to build on that. They're going to play you based on your fascination. So you can go home and then tell your loved ones that, guess who you dealt with today? I guess I dealt with this person. I dealt with this person. Then you're not here for the right reasons. Once you start showing the inmates that you're fascinated by what they've done, man, it opens up a hell of a door for manipulation, because it gives the inmate the power and control because of your fascination, because you're their fan. Crazy, right? So fascinated by them that you're coming off as their fan. And that's where they get control. And guys, if you ever get a chance, I wrote this book, Inmate Manipulation Decoded, and I also wrote this book, Breaking Boundaries. I would recommend you guys get these books, even definitely if you work in a prison, but even if you don't work in a prison, there's a lot of information there that's very relevant to real world applications. I think you guys will get a kick out of that book. I think there's a lot of information there that you can apply. You just got to figure it out, but you can apply, because you're managing human beings. So whether they're confined or not, it's human beings. You're going to find them outside. The manipulators, you're going to find them behind the wall, just more compressed a little bit. But this book is very helpful for people in the field, but they'll tell you how much help it provides them, and also managing relationships that really aren't beneficial. As always, guys, the show is tip. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Hope there's a lot of information here, and more to come. Stay safe.